In this last project, you'll be writing a program that utilizes void functions, value returning functions, and void functions with reference parameters. The one thing I want to recommend before you move on and get started with coding this program is to watch all the videos in the Assignment 7 folder. They're going to be useful and helpful in writing this code. This program utilizes functions to analyze stock prices for 2 days. So the program will ask the user to enter in some information. You'll need the stock symbol, the stock closing price for 2 different days, and then the program is going to calculate the percent change between day 1 and day 2, the difference between the prices, and then the average of the closing prices. So the first thing you should begin with is the user must enter the stock symbol, the day 1 stock price, and the day 2 stock price. Take a look at these next few slides that describe the functions you're going to need to write. The first function is get data. This should be a void function that utilizes reference parameters. It's going to read the following user input that must be returned to main. Okay, the first is the stock symbol as a string. Next is the stock closing price for day 1. And the third is the stock closing price for day 2. And as I said earlier, you're going to utilize reference parameters to get those values back to main. This is a sample of what the input might look like. The next function should be called calculate change. The objective of this function is to calculate the percent change from day 1 to day 2. This must be a value returning function. So you're going to calculate the percent change, and then using the return statement, you're going to return that value back to main. So in this slide here, I do explain how to calculate percent change. You can also Google that calculation, but if you just take a look here, one thing you're going to need before you begin is you'll need to pass the closing price for each day. So value for day 1 and value for day 2 must be passed into this function. The calculation itself, you're going to take the day 2 closing price and subtract the day 1 closing price. So it's day 2 minus day 1. Then take the difference, whether it's positive or negative, and divide it by the day 1 price. Okay? Then you're going to take that value and multiply by 100. So that should give you the percent change. Then using the return statement, return that value back to main, making sure that when you have your function call, you have it in an assignment statement to accept the value. Okay, next function is calculate diff av. So calculate the difference and the average. So this again is a void function that calculates the difference between the day 1 and day 2 price, whether it's a gain or a loss, so it could be a positive or negative value, and it must calculate the average price. This function must be passed the closing price for each day again. And since it's a void function, you will not be returning any of those values. You're going to need to use reference parameters to get those values back to main. So I'm going to need to see here that you understand the difference between a value parameter and a reference parameter. The reference parameters should only be those values that are being returned back to main that are changing inside of the function. So the ones changing inside of the function are the calculation for the difference and the calculation for the average. Okay, and the last function is the display function, and you've done this sort of thing before. What I'd like this function to do is to display all of the values from the previous functions. So this should be a void function that displays all the values. It should display a little header here, financial report for, and then this is the stock symbol. It should then display the percent gain or loss as a percentage. it should show the difference between the two stock prices, and it should show the average closing price right here. Okay, and so what you're seeing is that you're going out to 2 decimal places for all of these values. So be sure to use your input-output manipulators for that. And again, this function is a void function, so it should accept all the parameters as value parameters. Okay, and that should do it for your functions. Now, just like I did with Project 6, this is how I would suggest organizing your code. So in main, you would have any variables you need, your variable definitions up at the top, and then the next steps are going to be calling the getData function, calling the calculateChange function, calling calculateDiff and av, and then finally calling display. So main reads like a table of contents, and it's sending your code into each of these functions to perform the task, but just it's basically directing traffic, so to speak. Okay, and then finally, just some reminders. For each function, do a nice comment block. The reason for this, there's a few different reasons for this. One of the reasons for this is it helps you think through giving it a name, a purpose, what's going in, what's going out. I didn't put out, but here, whatever's going out, right? So whether you're using reference parameters or value return, so here list any values going back to main. Okay. But also, besides thinking through everything and helping you design this, it also creates a clear identifier for where one function ends and another function begins. So it makes your code super easy to read for anyone who comes after you, which is most cases in a working environment. As far as project requirements goes, as always, it's important to comment your code, especially at this point as your programs are longer and as we start breaking things up into functions. Place comments at the top of your source code with your name and a brief program description, comments throughout your code, and comments for each function as I just described. Be sure to keep variable and constant declarations together. Do not declare variables in a calculation. Do not put calculations in a cout statement. I would like to see that things are nice and clear, easy to understand. Doing it this way is acceptable, but it can cause errors. Also keep in mind that you should format your output as in the sample provided.